Our guests today are Mahmoud Mohideen, the Senior Vice President at the World Bank Group in charge of partnerships, and also Georgia Petkowski, who is a Senior Fellow at the Zicklin Center. Mahmoud, Georgia, thank you so much for joining us today on Knowledge at Wharton.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Mahmoud, maybe to begin with you, when we met in Washington, D.C. last year, we were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was wondering if we could begin by talking about where are things today? Where do things stand in terms of the implementation of those goals?
Right. There are many ways in looking at the progress on the SDGs. One of them is the official way of handling the progress. So if you measure it by the number of presentations and submissions to the UN system through ministers of finance and development, it is going to be on the increase because many more countries have committed to present their plans for the 2030 agenda. And they are all going to be doing that in July this year at the UN headquarters in New York. So you can really see that there is some sort of official commitment demonstrated by the number of ministers and governments participating this year. That will bring the total of submissions and presentations to more than 110 countries. So this is more than half of the membership of the UN, which is 193 countries. Then you take it into the more practical level, at the national level. How many countries have done better in terms of designing their own national plans, design their own budgets to deal with the SDGs? I would say that not all of those who submitted have done that. There is always a difference between what's happening in reality and the official presentations. And the measure of that is basically how many countries that you can log in their websites and see the SDGs in their budgets. And you will be surprised to see that there are only very small number of countries which have done that so far. The justification could be that still the third year since the launching of the SDGs, that some of the lines of business are continuing, but without really naming or renaming them under the new SDGs. But coming from a finance institution, we take matters more seriously when you see the government plans are reflected in their budget priorities. The third level, which is more important than the two, is basically the local level. To what extent you have seen improvements in people's lives or the policies and institutions addressing their issues of concern since the launching of the SDGs in 2015. As we know, the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, are about more inclusive growth, better social development, and better consideration for environment and climate change issues. Again, not all countries have done that at the local level. There are some good, bright cases. I was in Colombia recently. I've seen some good progress. I know that there are other Latin American countries, including Mexico and others, who are taking this issue seriously. There are countries in the East like China and Vietnam and Korea and Japan who have the good investments in the connection between the central level and the local level. India have done well in that front as well. In Africa, I think there are many issues that are constraining governments, but again, you can really see countries like Rwanda doing very well in this front. This doesn't mean that others are not doing, but basically I'm trying to give examples of exceptional progress in terms of the commitment of the leadership and translating this commitment into some sort of localized solutions.
So are you happy with the progress so far, or do you think things are running a little bit later than you would like?
Yeah, well, it's very much related to the performance at the country level. So it's not my happiness, it's the people's happiness that matter here. If we are seeing this kind of improvement at the local level and people are more engaged and seeing some sort of better impact on reduction of poverty, improvement on health and education services, and the rest of the 17 goals, you can see every development agency and its staff like me happy with the progress.
Georgia, turning to you, one of the initiatives that you and the Zicklin Center have been collaborating on with the World Bank Group and other partners is the Ideas for Action, which is a way to inspire young people to get involved in coming up with ideas to make the Sustainable Development Goals a reality. How is that program coming along based on what Mahmood just said in terms of countries that are not perhaps doing as much as they could be doing as quickly as they should be doing?
I mean, this year we are really surprised. I mean, last year we were surprised because we doubled the proposals, but this year we tripled the proposals, which clearly demonstrate tremendous interest from young people to be part of this process, to own the process, and at the same time to come with actionable ideas of implementation. So what Mahmoud was referring, that the government is signaling commitment to these issues. Now the question is, because the implementation at the end of the day will not happen just because the government engage. You have to engage the private sector. You have to engage young entrepreneurs. And this is something where we would like to engage with. And the fact that we, in addition to students, we have young entrepreneurs and young professionals, that means that they are also making kind of not just pressure, but making the CEOs of the companies more comfortable that they have already young people working for them who can come with innovative ideas. So basically, we triple the proposals. We have over 2,100. The number of teams was 4 times higher than that. We have examples of business associations like the German-Brazilian Chamber of Commerce, which utilize the network of companies to engage them in young professionals to generate ideas. In Eastern Europe, a pharmaceutical company, Hemopharm, used this as a platform, not only to generate ideas to make their company more sustainable or engagement in sustainability, but at the same time really to communicate to the government that corporations can get engaged with additional and critical knowledge of how to deal with these issues.
So that's really very encouraging to know that the amount of participation has increased so much. What are some of the reasons that drove this increase?
I think the philosophy of this program that is not just about competition, but is a platform for learning, platform for exchanging knowledge, and critically local partnership. I mean, we made some major breakthroughs, for example, in Egypt, and that was driven by Idea for Action Egypt Club, major breakthrough in Nigeria, but Idea for Action African Club. I already mentioned the Hemopharm, the company in Eastern Europe. I mentioned the Chamber of Commerce. So basically, I think the collaboration between the Zicklin Center and the World Bank is more or creating that platform and facilitating so that the local initiatives are better designed and also supported so that they can generate better ideas.
Coming back to you, how does the Ideas for Action program fit in more broadly with what you and the World Bank are trying to achieve with the Sustainable Development Goals?
One of the main things that came out from the UN discussions of the SDGs, and one of the main things that we are pushing at the bank, is the issue of partnerships. It's one of the goals of the Sustainable Development Agenda. And in our case, it's basically about how to rely on our own comparative advantage when it comes to finance or knowledge, but realizing as well that others would have their own comparative advantages in some particular fields. The advantage of doing this kind of partnership with Wharton as a place of excellence when it comes to knowledge and academia. The partnerships with the business sector, and the partnership with young minds and young people with their own ideas and their own ways of challenging the status quo. And actually the whole thing came out from here. I was invited by Georgia 40 years ago to one of his classes, and based on an exchange and of ideas and discussion, on my way back to Washington, D.C., I called him from the train. I said, well, why don't we start having all of these ideas institutionalized rather than having them coming out from a seminar or a lecture? So let's have that, and not limit it to Wharton, and make it a kind of a big platform. And the idea developed, and this is the 4th year. We have thousands of participants from around the world, from more than 120 countries, coming with their own proposals. Tough competition, because and actually the difficulty now is not for those who wrote the proposals and finishing them. The difficulty, as it happened last year and the year before, for those who are going to be assessing such high quality of good ideas, mixing very good understanding in a positive way, good understanding of the problems in their neighborhoods, in their villages, in their townships, and their urban areas as well, with whatever they learned in school and university, with their exposure of different ideas coming through the open space of ideas around the world, and getting that all in a way to convince very tough assessors of what could be really a good, workable, scalable proposal on finance for development.
You mentioned 120 countries involved in this exercise. Is it your sense that it is primarily the developing countries that should be focusing on the SDGs? Or is this also something for the developed countries to focus on? For example, are SDGs also important for the U.S.?
It is the main thing about the SDGs in comparison to its predecessor, the MDGs, or the Millennium Development Goals in the past, which ended in 2015, that the previous goals were basically focusing on developing countries and human development, and with particular areas of work, only 8 goals. The new and the more challenging aspect of the SDGs, it's universality. It is addressing the challenges in the poorest of the countries in the world, and the challenges as well of progress and maintaining what you have, and improving on it in the most advanced of the economies. And if we measure it again by the submissions, you will be happy to see that there is this enthusiasm by developing countries, but again, many of the OECD countries, the Nordics, some of the richest countries in the world were in the forefront, including the G20 and the G7 countries, have been submitting earlier than others, just to challenge themselves and their communities about what's going to be happening in the future.
Now, Georgia, Mahmood referred to the tremendous difficulty of taking all these thousands of wonderful ideas and trying to cherry-pick some of the most impactful ideas. How do you do that? How do you select which are the best ideas that should be focused on and prioritized?
Okay, let me first mention that those who are making the selection are also very motivated to do that, because for them, that's exposing themselves to the reality on the ground. So it's a mutually learning process. When we have people from IFC or the World Bank selecting these projects in a particular country, for example, they will get pretty clear idea what from young people perspectives are priorities for these countries. And there are very different layers of selection, so that in each layer they get more feedback on how to improve their proposals. And of course, the final proposals will end up in the book, which is published by the World Bank, which goes through very elaborate editing. The bottom line basically is, yes, it takes time, but if you don't look at it as a mechanical process of selection, but as a process of learning and providing feedback for those who are participating, is very fulfilling.
I'm sure it is. Now, coming back to you, these days there's a tremendous focus on science and technology and innovation as game changers in how the world of business is evolving and the world of economic development is evolving. How do you see the role of innovation and science and technology in the implementation of the SDGs overall, but also in the kind of ideas that are proposed through initiatives like Ideas for Action?
This is a very good question. STI, or Science, Technology, and Innovation, were included in the documents of Addis, which are basically the documents related to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. There is a full chapter on that. But and as you know, Addis happened in July 2015. But because of the fast changes that are happening in the areas of science and innovation and technology, and this big discussion about the implications of the fourth industrial revolution, if you write this chapter today, despite the fact that it's only 3 years old, it will be a completely different chapter in terms of the ways of handling the matter, in terms of the kind of partnerships. You feel that in the Addis agenda it was more of the responsibility of the government alone to do that, and perhaps to partner with the centers of excellence and the private sector. Now, in reality, you can really see who are driving the changes in this area. Yes, government is involved in different aspects. It can incubate and support and give a good platform for the flourishing of new ideas and better technological solutions. But the private sector, business, and academia that are basically behind all of these new ideas. So I think the emphasis will be different, and the kind of achievable outcomes from a focus on science, technology, and innovation, rather than dealing with it as a kind of a separate sector, it should be mainstreamed and integrated in every aspect of work, including how to get better data by using big data solutions and other means to get better evidence of what works and what doesn't work. When we talk about finance, to what extent the use of technology, mobile money, crowding finance, the new technologies, including blockchain and some of its good and controversial outcomes as well, how can we consider them? When we talk about implementation, how technology can enable a hospital or a clinic in a remote village to get the best ideas coming out, say, from the United States of America when it comes to good solutions to medical problems and diseases. So all of these kinds of new ideas associated with STI needs to get us into a more dynamic version of considering it, rather than just say, well, getting more from the government and ignoring the private sector and the academic centers when it comes to the partnerships.
Well, one of the most interesting things that Mahmoud just mentioned, Georgia, is the role of academia in helping to come up with these ideas. How do you see, from your perspective of the Ideas for Action program, the role of academic institutions in making these kinds of initiatives successful?
Yeah, I mean, let me just step back before directly answering that question. Over the weekend, the Zingley Center organized an event related to blockchain. Yes. And there was an interesting presentation from a colleague from MIT who basically said most of the disruptive innovations in that space come from people between 24 and 28 years old. Mm. So you ask the question, what kind of education they got before they got there? So I think from academic perspective, we have at least two challenges. One is to go beyond the traditional boundaries, because in that space of blockchains, you see people from technology side and lawyers to make sure that they don't get in trouble. Yes. But they are development experts, business people are not there. So I would argue that there is still a disconnect between what are the most exciting technological solutions and what are the real needs on the ground that needs to be addressed to this. And I think that hit Silicon Valley is already feeling. There is no major new ideas coming from there because it's more kind of a linear improvement on the technology side, but not a major change of identifying the real problems that can be handled and make money, by the way. It's not just an abstract philanthropy or development issues. Now, of course, course, on the academia side, one big benefit of this whole initiative is that we, from one side, we capture the reality on the ground, but we also get understanding of what are the gaps in terms of knowledge and skills that these young people are coming and cannot utilize them because they are facing a little bit different reality than what is sometimes presented in the regular education. And for academics, I think identifying these gaps is a good reminder that in addition of publishing papers, they also need to be a little bit more focused and careful how through that process we are preparing the next generation of leaders or entrepreneurs so that they really deal with these fundamental issues.
Great. Well, looking now to the future a little bit, one of the biggest issues that the world faces today is that of gender imbalance and how even the resources that exist are distributed so unequally between men and women. If you think about the use of innovation and science and technology in not just empowering women, but bringing about greater gender parity around the world, what are some of the new ideas that can be implemented to drive that sort of change? Mahmoud, I wonder if you have any thoughts on new initiatives that could point in that direction.
Yeah, just to recognize and confirm what you said, the problems related to inequality, discrepancy, and unfairness against women are all over, not just in the developing countries, but in many of the advanced economies as well. Absolutely. When it comes to pay, opportunities, fairness in dealing. But when it comes to developing countries, women would be suffering from the same problems like what men would suffer from, but they have their own problems as well. And one of the new initiatives that we are trying to develop and to launch during the spring meetings of the World Bank and the IMF in April this year is an initiative that would link the SDGs to women entrepreneurs, recognizing that if you happen to be a woman in a rural area under the age of 25, so each one of what I said now, being a woman in a rural area under 25, brings different aspects of disadvantages and discrimination when it comes to financial inclusion, access to market, and access to opportunities. We can really see that technology and innovation, especially in the IT field, could really bring many good solutions to these problems. But you need to have the investments. Some of these investments could be related to the digital world, but many of them could be analog investments. So we shouldn't really be undermining the importance of good education, good access on the road, better investment in nutrition and health for women as well. Having said that, we are in partnership again with the Zicklin Center and Wharton Business School and with the UN system through the participation of the United Nations the Development Program, with the UN Women, with variety of economic commissions of the UN system and the business sector. We are having an initiative, we're calling it SDGs and Her. So it's Sustainable Development Goals and women in all ages. But we're focusing on the role of women as entrepreneurs through their own micro-enterprises and whatever they are investing of their time and their efforts and their talents in order to bring some solutions to their poverty and the poverty of their families and the poverty of their neighborhoods.
So, Georgia, this sounds like a very interesting initiative. From the Zicklin Center's point of view, what is your perspective? How would this fit in with the work that you're already doing for Ideas for Action? And where would you like to see this initiative go?
Well, from one side, there is a tremendous complementarity in this because many proposals we receive are coming from young girls and women, so the connections is already there. And also we would like through this engagement to utilize this not as a competition for good ideas or recognizing women who've been successful so far, but also utilizing the resources that Wharton and other academic institutions have to provide a platform where they can better equip themselves to take a leadership role. Because it's not a matter whether we cannot just separate the fact that they are not equally paid. We first to have, not us at least, in parallel we have to address, are they equally equipped do they have opportunity to really get access to that knowledge that will make them more creative, more productive? And through that, and what Mahmoud mentioned, I think the critical question is their role as heads of the families. So it's not just about a woman, it's about their family, about encouraging their own daughters to get in this space. So I think from our perspective, definitely this is something where we would like to go, stronger.
To sort of wrap this up with one final question for each of you, if I were to ask you to gaze into the crystal ball and look at the future, the next 12 to 24 months, where would you want to see Ideas for Action and this SDGs and HER initiative go, and what contribution would you like to see it make to the Sustainable Development Goals around the world? Mahmoud, start with you perhaps.
Well, three things. For the Ideas for Action, next year is going to be the 5th year. So we hope for more progress, and progress is measured by two things: by the quantity, and we are happy with the enormous progress, and we hope to reach not just the 120 plus countries, but the whole membership of the World Bank and the UN system. In terms of quality, while we are very much impressed by the quality, we need more in terms of having ideas that could be workable solutions and scalable. And the third is related to the SDGs and HER. While it is following the good footsteps of the Ideas for Action, but we need really to see a big start for this one initiative, given the importance of the role of women, especially young women and micro-enterprises in the society and the economy, and to have the impact shared.
Wonderful. Georgia, I think you have the final word. What would you?
Wow, that's a big pressure. Okay, I would say first to go beyond what usually is a topic of conversation of heroic entrepreneurs, people who will change the world, solve all these global problems. We would like to see more progress at the local level, more progress of initiatives which are driven at the local level, solving the local problems, because that will be key contribution to solving these more broader programs. And that's what we've been particularly this year achieving. So we also want to see more recognitions of these ideas at the local level, because they solve specific problems. And we will see in the coming months, in fact, that is happening in Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a country with not that strong institutions. I think Nigeria, Colombia, in the Balkans. And that's what I'm really after, more in terms of implementation, but through that implementation, shaping the ecosystem inside the country and even sub-local level, so that more ideas, which are not necessarily generated through Ideas for Action, will have a chance to succeed.
Well, Mahmoud, Georgia, thank you so much for speaking today with Knowledge at Wharton.
Thank you very much.
For more insight from Knowledge at Wharton, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu.